Good evening, all. So we have a very interesting topic lined up for discussion today. The 3S of payment systems. So what are these 3S's? Namely, speed, security, and the seamless nature of how the business has to perform. Now, one of the things that we see today in India, if you notice, is that the payment industry in India has grown in a tremendous manner. One of the surveys conducted by a financial firm across around 25 countries, rather, puts us right at the apex of this whole game of payment industry. And this is, again, it's fueled by the growth in India, as well as the innovation and the ecosystem support, the regulatory support that has been provided by the government. One of the key things that we see is there's a lot of collaboration happening between the OEMs, the banks, the third-party service providers, and all this is kind of creating a huge ecosystem, a value chain that produces a lot of growth from an India perspective. And we are at that cusp where we are actually looking at how this system can be improved, or even going forward, how this actually needs to perform. So the panel we have a learned panel with us. We have Hayk who has come from Singapore, all the way from Singapore. So he brings in a wide kind of view across business, as well as from an international standpoint. We have Vinod from Fino, and he brings in the view from operations perspective, as well as Tejas from Axis, who actually brings in a view from an infrastructure IT standpoint. So we'll be joined by one more gentleman, Vivek, as well from Reliance, as well as to talk about the overall different perspective, that is from a risk standpoint. So why don't we kickstart this discussion? So I would want to open up the panel, probably starting from Hayk, to just give us a view of the overall perspective. What are the challenges that we see when you look at payment industry as a whole, and looking at this 3S's per se?
Thanks. So, like you mentioned, guys, I come from Singapore. It's a city, and they have a lot of the same kind of problems. So one of the problems is that there is a lot of payment systems. There's a lot of wallets, and a lot of them are not necessarily easy to use. So challenge in that is the same, I think, in India, that basically there's a lot of choice. None of them is obvious. And secondly, interoperability and universality is just like in India, in Singapore, it doesn't really exist. So from my perspective, ease of use, universal application, and of course, a lot of them require also things like data or mobile phone, I think are the critical things. But this is very high level, right? So that's how I would like to open up. And just say that Singapore, being a 5.7 million population city, has more than a few hundred payment systems. It's one city. So I think analyzing that could be also an interesting lesson for India. Thanks.
Fino Payments Bank actually operate more in urban, and 80% of our operations in rural area. So what we have seen the operation time, the people, the customers, and the users and our merchants, they want a seamless transaction. It should be very fast. Actually, nobody is ready to wait for even a millisecond to know if the system is slow or in transaction is not going through, wait and watch for some time. That scenario is actually totally gone. So while we look at not at the urban area, even while going to the interiors of India also, the users, they line up from 4 o'clock for the transactions. The moment they are coming up, they want just the transaction to go. If there's a delay, if something is not happening, they immediately switch to the next point of area where they can actually do some transaction. So it becomes very imperative and very important for all the payment system ecosystem to ensure that the speed is available, Same time, all the kind of transactions they want to have, the type of transactions they want to do, it should be available then and there. They come for IMPS transaction or UPI or APS, they want it has to be happening at the moment they want to do it. Same time, now the security awareness has been so high, the people are very much ensuring that the transaction, the account or anything they are actually dealing with the bank, the financial institution needs to be very secure. So they're ensuring that those kind of reputation is available, the security controls are put in place to engage with the bank or engage the payment ecosystem. So that's what the movement is now.
Sure. Thanks, Vinod. Tejas?
Yeah, so I represent Axis Finance, and since the challenges which are facing, like I face the internal customer wherein they need to have the robust solution, and the security part is that we need to have all the system integrated tightly with the securities like encryption, the two-factor, and we also need to ensure that there are many solutions like phishing attacks or maybe malware. So that is the overall infra wherein I need to ensure, and the challenges which my internal customer which is facing, and I need to ensure that it is fast and quick.
Sure. Thanks, Tejas. Probably, Avez, one of the things that we are discussing right now is with respect to some of the challenges faced when it comes to the 3 S's, be it the security, speed, or even the seamless nature of how we do payment transactions. So I would like to get your views on, what is your thoughts? What do you see happening out there in the industry?
Speed is very much required when we talk about, competitors being insurtechs, fintechs, and we are talking about the exodus of technology, what technology is bringing, right? The business and the IT guys working on too much of bringing in, leveraging the technology. It's very much important that we also provide them speed. So I think a couple of days back, there was an article called 10 Best Features of an Agile CISO. So these days, they are not talking about agile business, they're talking about agile CISO. Right? So security and speed do goes, it's a requirement of the hour. What couple of things which we are doing is we are trying to get the CISO involved at the very design stage. And we are trying to now push in the vendors to get the security testing done before they get even empaneled with us. So these couple of things which we are doing, which are increasing our speed, because many a times when a vendor comes in, be it an insurtech vendor or any vendor, they conventionally don't follow any security norms, right? So when they are trying to integrate with your environment, and if they come up with a security testing done already from a certain empaneled vendor, you have a lot of time saved while doing your VAPTs and testings and closures, right? And the vendor itself has been conditioned about the importance of security in a particular environment they are trying to enter into. And when the CISO is involved, when the risk team is involved from the design stage itself, right? Parallelly, you work security and designing together so that your UAT and your production is always achieved on time. So a couple of these things which we internally trying to do, and it's working for us. It's making the business team feel very happy about security. Otherwise, they were always very sad about security.
Okay, so probably what I understand is technology plays a critical role when it comes to these 3 S's that we are talking about. And to kind of take this discussion forward, I guess, I heard the similar kind of tone coming from Vinod, Tejas, as well as Hayk, with respect to how the nature of business is kind of, speeding up. We wanted to kind of focus on some of the critical issues, be it from a risk standpoint or a cybersecurity standpoint. What are those key issues that you think should be addressed or kind of, can be highlighted for the benefit of this audience here? Hayk?
Thanks. So your question is, what are the risk issues, right? Like, I think a panelist before me was just mentioning that with all the payment systems, you get a lot of data generated, right? And there is all kinds of, whether that's an attack on a service or spoofing attack or any of those services, any of those things that happen to all this system. So the question is, how do you use, which is what I'm repeating her question, how do you use data to not only prevent, but improve the overall system and basically strengthen it? So I mean, one of the things, I didn't say anything about what we do, but we advise in emerging tech, that's AI, blockchain, and we advise in behavioral sciences applied to different use cases in banks and insurance companies. So this question goes to the heart of some of what we do. So we look at the data, and we try to turn that data, or advise how to turn that data into something actionable, into something that can be converted ideally into your product roadmap. You have a payment system. We help you understand what could be done with the data, with current trends, to turn that into something that's going to help your product both prevent potential problems or downtime or any security risks, as well as strengthen it. So my answer to you would be basically using AI in this case, and probably on another point I'll talk more on the business side of things.
Okay, excellent. So analytics and analysis of data and primarily driving decisions based on what we understand from the data. It's a critical thing. Thanks for that view.
I'll also like to add a point. Change management and third-party vendor management are also some of the key points which you spoke about. You asked us to highlight the risk areas. I'm engaging with a vendor, and the vendor is being bought by a venture capitalist. His entire focus is changed, and you are in a toss. So you are in a midway of a project, and your vendor's priorities change. How do you manage it? So when you're dealing with a lot of third parties because of the agile environment, I think having a very robust vendor risk management is also very important, and having a culture of change management. Because change management, both with internal stakeholder, with external stakeholder, is very important, and that's one of the risk areas which comes up between the 3S.
Absolutely, absolutely, and a very apt point, because of when we look at the payment value chain itself, there's a lot of players, and there's a lot of interoperability that happens between multiple players in this value chain itself. And the different roles that these players play, be it an issuer or a merchant, etc. So it's a critical aspect, I believe, Tejas, which we brought up. And from an overall operation standpoint, if I have to ask Vinod, what is your viewpoint? What are some of those security challenges, risk challenges that you foresee from this perspective?
So the past maybe 1 or 2 years time, the threat itself is actually taking a different level itself. If you look at the frauds earlier, it used to be the hacking of the sites, and only the educated kind of people, or those kind of people used to get the threat from a usage of internet and the mobile banking applications. Today, while I'm looking at the kind of operation Fino has, so today we have about 1 lakh merchants across India, and they are actually catering to a lot of users, interiors of India. So there the threat is totally different level. So the users, there are some educated people, there are uneducated people. So how to protect the uneducated people who just understand to do a transaction? So actually they know that, okay, they come to the merchant point or branch, use their Aadhaar enabled APS for doing the transaction. A lot of duping happening there. How to protect that from the bank side? Second, the merchants. I'm sure that almost all the banks are using their BCs as merchants as people. How the merchants are actually duping, trying to dupe the bank or the payment system. How we can protect. Third level is actually the kind of setup to do the frauds. Like I'm sure that almost everybody would have heard about the AnyDesk or TeamViewer kind of systems used to take the remote and do a lot of frauds in last 6 months' time. RBI itself has actually initiated a circular to control and protect actually those kind of frauds happening across India. So a lot of action needs to be done from a bank perspective to ensure that the real customers are actually able to do the transaction, how to protect the bank. So we, as a bank, actually, we enable a lot of security systems at the front end for the users to do, at the same time at the back end to validate and to ensure that only the real customers are actually doing the transaction. That became a big challenge for almost all the banks. So I think there are multiple pockets of India, this kind of fraudsters actually concentrate, and they will doing a lot of fraudulent transactions. So somebody actually, I'm sure that you will appreciate the kind of quality of fraudulent call those people make to convince the merchants and the users that, okay, they are actually calling from the bank and able to get the OTPs and transaction passwords and registered mobile numbers and doing the transactions. So last year I attended a meeting which is actually conducted by RBI and tried together to ensure that how we can actually protect this kind of fraudulent calls. Or the call centers and other areas actually put in place in India to do the fraudulent calls itself. So the level of frauds, or the level of organized frauds actually I should say, is increased high time. So a lot of concentrations given by banks and the regulators to ensure that those kind of protected customers are, the genuine customers are able to do the transactions.
Okay, thanks, Vinod. So, are you intending to say that the threat perception with respect to payment industry, payment systems itself, is it much different than what we see with respect to the regular banking area, or is it somewhere mapping to the same kind of threats?
So, threats are different actually. So, one, the real fraud that is happening, that is one side of from a transaction perspective. Same time, we are seeing that in our case, we have a lot of merchants. The merchants are actually doing a lot of transactions or anything. I will not say fraudulent transaction, but using any operational or process gaps to make more money out by different way of actually doing the transactions. So it may not be the right way to do it, but they are actually to try each and every process gap, be it from a regulator side or from a bank side, do the transaction, make more money, make more commissions or incentives. So the process and operational level of surveillance that a bank needs to be put in place today is increased heavily. It is not that actually you just give the facilitate the people to actually do the transaction and get the things go. No. We need to be very vigilant about what kind of transactions are happening, how they are transacting. More than that, actually, as a bank, we are actually more focusing on the behavioral patterns for them. How they are actually, each and every merchant or user, how they are behaving to the system, how they are doing the transaction, also using FRM systems and other systems, how we can actually monitor that, alert and take actions on that.
Sure, thanks, Vinod. I guess it goes back to what Avez was talking about. When there are multiple players, it's a classic issue that we have seen as well from an industry standpoint, where there were several threats with respect to how transaction can be manipulated. We tend from a cybersecurity standpoint, we call it web parameter tampering, but those, even though those are kind of age-old techniques of, cyber attack, but that is being used effectively when it comes to payment industry, various players. And one of the things that we see, and this is where I guess it goes back to what Avez was talking about, when there are multiple third parties involved, how do we ensure this whole ecosystem is secure and we all play by the same rules? And also, I would want to probably, at that note, bring in Ave's, from a risk standpoint, what do you see as some of the key areas that you anticipate as something that we need to kind of work on and develop ourselves as an industry?
So, everybody is familiar with Games of Thrones and what happened with them. Games of Thrones is a very famous HBO series broadcasted in USA, and the vendor who does an editing is based in Andheri. Right? So the final episode, which was supposed to be very classical and full of suspense, when it came for editing in Andheri, the guy who was doing it had a girlfriend who was very fond of this particular series. And he, out of curiosity, just said, boss, I have the unrelayed version of it, completely raw. I'm giving it to you. He added a caveat to it. Guess what? Do not share with anyone. And she exactly did the same. Shared with everyone, and there was a huge breach. And there was a huge litigation going around. Any which ways people are now the outsourcing business coming to India is already, we are losing that charm because of integrity issues. So in this particular case, or a lot of incidents happen in Uber. Why Uber has all of a sudden started giving us number plate details. These days, if you observe Uber, they are even sending you a message to look at the number plates now. They are hiding your numbers from the driver. So many incidences happen. The incident which first happened with Uber Delhi was there was a lack of driver's background check. Who failed into it? The vendor failed into it. The third party failed into it. So if you look at all the major breaches, there is somewhere a third party related to it. So we take care of all the perimeters of our entire crown jewels. We spend billions of rupees and we give it the testing to be done by an engineer who completely doesn't take care of the security, or a chartered accountant, a high street chartered accountant who comes to your office, have all the policy details, have the procedures details, go back to his office, and he's hacked. You know, there are so many SMEs who are getting ransomware attacked, but it's not been known to the audience. So again, for me, the biggest concern is my third party, because I'm taking care of an entire environment of mine. But what about my partner who's coming in?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, Avis, you brought up that critical point of how the
I think the key risk factor broadly divides into system and people. So basically, it is a people awareness.
True.
Yes, absolutely. Human is the weakest link.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that is where I believe you might lock your house, the front door with padlocks and biometrics and whatnot. If you keep the windows open, it doesn't matter. So that is something that is a critical aspect of how it can impact both cybersecurity as such, but from there the speed is compromised as well as the seamless nature of business is compromised.
If I may add also one more point to what you're saying. So it's very good that the perception here, and this is very common among financial institutions, perception is that you throw technology on a problem, especially if it's a new problem, and it's going to solve it. So unfortunately, like the illustration with Game of Thrones or the other cases, it's actually not true. For most part, technology is a tool. It's the how, it's the tactical thing. So the question here is usually tackled, and I'm saying from a very high level or conceptual perspective, is you have to zoom out from the technology and look at what makes these players, the players who are performing bad, who are fraudulent, who are trying to cheat the system. What's their motivation? Why are they doing this? And I'm coming from the point because we actually look at these cases. We look at it, and the solution to that is not necessarily technological. Technology can make it happen because that's the tool. But you have to understand what's the incentives for those, what's the motivations, why do they do what do they do, what makes them tick, what norms they abide by. And those kind of questions, you're looking at behavioral sciences, because guess what? Whether you like it or not, a lot of the financial information that you have in payment systems, it's behavioral data. It's literally caused and stored due to specific behavioral patterns of people. If you don't understand behavioral science, which 99% of financial institutions don't yet, it's very hard to understand why anyone does, whether that's good or bad. The security part of it or operational part comes because there is a specific direct negative impact.
One of the examples what we face from a behavior point of view, the users. So we have implemented lat long in our banking system. See, we understand actually how many merchants are in which state, which district, which point. And from each point, actually, we take the details of each and every merchant who are associated to our bank. How do they do that transaction? All the transactions, the methods they are doing from each and every area, we track. If any of the merchant is actually doing a transaction in a particular lat long area, he is moving from that A location to B location. Some other day we identify this. Actually, this person is actually moved from here to a next area, and they are actually doing the transaction. So merchants is not we are tracking from an application perspective, but more from their location perspective. And this is the way actually we are tracking that different cities of the state, different districts of the state, and different states actually how these people are actually behaving, how the merchant transactions are actually changing, the patterns are changing. A merchant who normally used to do a lot of AEPS transaction today, suddenly is actually moving from AEPS transaction to IMPS. We know that something is actually happening there. The same merchant actually moving at different locations. So a lot of technological support actually needs to be done today to understand the behavior of the partners, the merchants, and the end users, how they behave on a day-to-day basis, how the transactions are changing. This is very important for every bank to do this. So it's not ending at only transactional simple fraud risk management that can actually capture the normal transaction pattern, to identify any of the frauds. So actually that is actually moved away from that to a different region, like using a AI or ML technology in the behind to analyze a lot of data, bring a lot of rules that can actually bring into the system, identify the frauds.
Sure. I guess there's a lot of I think important points Vinod made with respect to even geotagging transactions, right? That's a critical thing when it comes to how to ensure security as well as ensure the transaction integrity is monitored or even managed. So from Tejas, your perspective, I guess one of the critical things that we see, there's a lot of business requirements that come in. All right, and the speed at which we are now, we are talking about the agile way of working, the DevOps way of implementing things. There's a new ways of working that is primarily emerging across. And in light of this, how do you see, given your background on information technology area itself, how do you see, the friction between business and technology kind of tangoing together to achieve these larger business objectives when it comes to payment industry itself?
So I will give you one classic case wherein my business team wanted a certain set of a database transaction to be completed within some time or so. So I think initially it used to take maybe 3 to 4 hours or something like that. Then we started with called AI ML thing, wherein the automation part came in picture. So from 3 hours to almost to 30-40 minutes, this is what the TAT reduction after implementing such technologies called AI and ML. So this is what my business team wants, that either it should be fast, it should be, along with security, it should be maybe, business doesn't want any, latency, or they want a quick solution. So I will give one more case wherein we do a consumer durable loans, and we have hosted our application on MDM, wherein sales guy goes and do that loan thing on the tablet. So in case if the tablet crashes, so I think it's like a business loss, because if the customer will not wait maybe for 10 minutes, and if the tablet and the application is not working, so he will go away. So that is what my business wants. If it is not working, you give some other turnaround time or whatever. So that is what the expectation from the business guy, and we need to deliver it, including the security part like encryption and the whatever safety features we need to put in. So I think it goes hand in hand, technology and business part.
Sure. Thanks, Tejas. So I think even Hayk as well as Vinod talked about some of the critical things with respect to AI or even the advanced technologies like blockchain, etc., that is coming in, and also the need of the hour being kind of monitoring, geotagging, etc., that is being enforced. So this leads into a very critical and an apt question with respect to privacy as such in the current context. So I would probably start with Avez, being in the forefront of fighting privacy challenges. What is your view, Avez? Will we be compromising privacy? Knowing the complete transaction history, we store information about our clients. Everything from where they go and from where they transact. We know each and every data point about individuals. So how do you see this evolving?
So I'm personally very worried about this particular subject, privacy, because conventionally as a community, we are not much taught about privacy. We are like, we share our cars, we share our house. People, if you go to the chawl system, the doors are always open. Anybody can enter into it, pick up a paper, watch a TV. So people normally, the Indian culture is not that where people, we don't insure a car based on the driver's name, right? It's an unnamed driver is there. So we share each other's cars. We know so many details about so many people. But as insurer now, using a lot of artificial intelligence, machine learnings, robotics, we pull in a lot of database. For an example, I can tell which patient or which insured is having what ailment, what treatment he is going through, which he or she might not, is not comfortable sharing the detail with anybody else. And if this details goes out, it's a very embarrassing situation for both the insurance company as well as the insured. And it can take us to a huge amount of litigation. And I think the government understands this subject is very difficult, and that's the reason the whole privacy bill is now getting a bit delayed. We thought we will be, so our bill is almost 80% in par with the GDPR, and the bill has come up very well, but the fundamental problem will be the culture, right? How do we manage as users of the technology or users of the data, and how do we take care of privacy? Because a lot of awareness part has to be done. We can talk about, doing a behavioral analysis of people, right? But there are certain things that the banking regulation, the insurance regulation, both tells that every third party that comes into your organization, there has to be a RCO done, background check done. I don't think most of the companies still follow that protocol. The vendor's background check has never been done by insurance companies or the financial companies, right? They randomly come into your offices, tailgating happens, shoulder surfing happens. So privacy is still a journey, because for me, privacy is a journey, and the fundamental shift has to be brought in by awareness. Awareness has to be increased to take care of the privacy.
Sure. Thanks, Avez. So let's hear about an outside-in perspective on this from Hayk's perspective. What do you see? How is this being dealt with in, say, Singapore and the other kind of geographies that you have exposure to, Hayk?
Actually, yeah, I really agree with what Avez just said. There should be more transparency and awareness about it. But talking about privacy, firstly, you would be surprised. First world country like Singapore does not really care. I'm generalizing here. They don't really care, and nor they are so much aware of their privacy to an extent that the telcos go out of the way and exploit it in advertising and stuff. They have, like in India, DND list and etc. But even the awareness of being or not being on the DND lists is not there. But to your question, I mean, I have a very good example. Like, firstly, in Singapore, when you start questioning someone, what's a privacy, they say, is that my... Hello? Yeah, is that my telephone number? Because that really makes a difference. And I think a very good extreme example, and I'm calling it good because I think it is good, and I'll say in a second why, is Alibaba's Sesame system or GMA system. Anyone knows what that is? This is something that there are already companies that I know that are building it for India. What it is basically comprehensive profile of about you. It's not only a credit score, your name, your telephone number. It has information about your loans. It has your behavioral data. It has information about pretty much all aspects of your life. And what Chinese people are exposed to is basically their information is being used to give them different government and non-government services. For example, if you have a score that's 650 out of 950 or more, you don't have to stay in a hospital line, which would be 2 hours. So why I'm mentioning this or some other examples is because if I agree as myself to give some of my data in exchange for some advantages that I'll have, whether that's in public sector or private sector, Chinese people, for example, are happily doing it. Hence, Alibaba is very, very advanced in this. And so, like Ave said, there are certain cases where I might not be willing to share certain types of information. And frankly, if you think about it, I don't have to share a lot of my private photos on Facebook. So a lot of it is, again, from my point, going to be a behavioral problem. It's not a technology problem. Technology is going to help improve or solve or optimize. But the conceptual part of it is behavioral. What's going to make me incentivized to share or not share my detail with this agency, that e-commerce company, or with the government? To me, that's the real question.
Sure. A follow-on on that, Hayk. So when you talk about the behavioral data, say in a country like Singapore, where the DPA is enforced across, right, how do you see that as an either a regulating kind of guideline that has been put on you, either it slows down or kind of helps you in kind of formulating your strategy itself? Yeah,
so for those of you who don't know, for example, if you ask a random person on the street about their credit score in Singapore, 99% of the cases don't know what that is for them, and they don't even know if there is one in Singapore. That should be a telling sign for you. The thing is, Singapore government is a very specific technocrat type of a government, unlike India. What they do is they have a bit of a Rousseau social contract approach. They say, and that was historic, right? It went from third world in 1965 to being more developed than Europe. Lee Kuan Yew, the founding father and the former prime minister, he said, you give me some of your liberties, including your privacy. In exchange, I'll give you better life. I'll tell you I'll nudge you in this, that, or other direction and tell you what's best for you, not for us. So privacy, and that's why historically it's been like this, and that's why in Singapore till now, privacy is not such a thing, which is very astonishing considering it's a first world country, and mostly they are very aware, very sensitive about it. So to me, it's a very good example of how people sort of are used to not being very sensitive about their privacy, and yet they reap all the benefits that occur because of the fact that they sort of share, without even knowing it in many cases, their details with the government and with private sector.
Okay, thank you. Vinod, you had some point.
So privacy, I think a lot of trust is given by all the regulatory bodies, government, and including the corporates. The banks are having data. The RBI put a lot of controls and security mandates. What all actually the bank can reveal, the data that can be revealed, the unmasked data that can be kept in the databases. Same time, even the UIDA actually came up with a lot of requirements, and all the regulatory bodies are actually doing a thorough audit on all the data that is stored in the organization. It actually brought a lot of controls within the organization to ensure that the data that can be revealed or unmasked data that can be kept in the databases, unencrypted data that can be travel between the systems. All those controls been actually put in place. I'm sure that, like he said, the role of a CISO became very strong, and it is very much important today that to ensure that all these things are actually there in place. The same time, within the organization, a lot of requirements and the importance of the privacy to be protected between the information security team and the business team or the operations team, that became very important. How better the organization can actually build a system that can actually do the best without actually revealing the data, or the data being data encryption, masking being protected. There actually a lot of work is being actually done by the organizations today. It is growing. As both the team members mentioned, the awareness became very important, and I'm sure that everybody is actually giving a lot of importance today to ensure that the data protection is in place, because otherwise, if anything goes wrong, it will actually impact the entire organization. The reputational risk being actually put in place.
Absolutely. I think a valid point. So transparency is one thing. I guess being transparent with the consumers with respect to how we are collecting and processing data, as well as probably the key things that you talked about, how to kind of ensure that at each and every stage, how do we ensure data security itself becomes critical. And in fact, this has an impact on the speed itself, and the way in which we do interoperability with respect to the payment industry value chain. So Tejas, you have anything to add to the discussion on that part?
So I think I would agree saying that for me, data privacy means data security for all the systems. So let's say take maybe TLS, maybe SSL. So that's all the security features which we need to implement. Apart from that, we also have database encryption wherein whatever data cannot be theft. So that is one case. We also have system logs wherein we have to put all the logs in one single system so that in case of any attack or maybe any incident, we can refer it. So they are the basic security features which we are implementing, and overall every organization should go forward. I think that is the key factor.
Sure, I think a valid point, Tejas. So I think critical thing is, some of these controls that are being talked about with respect to encryption or masking, tokenization. I guess these are standards that are being followed by most of the banks, insurance companies, etc. But may not be so when it comes to a startup fintech company or an API kind of organization which actually deals with API payments, etc. So I think there's a critical thing that emerges from this, and leads to a good segue into the next topic, the last topic that I wanted to cover. With respect to how we have evolved, is it the right time for us to look at a kind of framework in the lines of, say, a PCI DSS for the overall payment industry itself? And should it be kind of led by the banking sector, or should it be a independent body that manages it, or should it be a government-controlled regulatory body which actually enforces this? Any thoughts on that, Aves?
So after demonetization, the total population of Indians banking, digitally banking, was much more than a lot of countries altogether, right? So we are a sone ki chudiya hai hum log, right? We have such a huge database of customers who are moved into a digital transaction mode, who are not aware how to manage those digital transactions, right? So for me, again, I keep on bringing this point again and again, is my user, and user, again, the rightly point he's touched upon, the user awareness is the fundamental point which we try to, so be it an end user, be it my partner, be it my stakeholder, be it anyone in my entire chain of business. For me, the awareness level is very important, because I might implement all the technologies possible, but still there are loopholes, still there are gaps. How do people take care of the data of my customers, of my stakeholders? There are so many incidences where people have kept that credit card data in a clear text, debit card data on clear text. Though they are applicable for PCI certification, they comes under the norms of PCI DSS certification. But there are cases wherein these players have kept themselves exposed. There are vulnerabilities being identified by so many bug bounty chasers in the market. So again, the topic here is to sensitize the people who are handling this database. That what can go wrong with this? Is any of the gentlemen here okay with their phone going into their wife's hand? We become uncomfortable in 10-15 minutes if the phone is in our wife's hand. It's normal tendency, right? So why don't we take care of a customer's data, be it a credit card data, debit card data, or the privacy which they filled on the form? So how do you make them aware, right? So we try to do a lot of gamification in our organization to make, so we do a gamification with our vendors also. We are requesting the HR to put one typical question to any candidate they interview. The HR, we are still negotiating with the HR, is ask them about security, ask them about privacy. They might not know about it, but they'll at least get to know that this company is serious about privacy and security.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's a valid point. I guess security, cyber security, as well as privacy, taking center stage in businesses, in the daily life is a very heartening thing to see in India.
I think the government is working on to bring this as a syllabus in school curriculums. So this will also, the next generation will be it will be a subject to them. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Tejas, from your perspective, how do you see this? From a, is it one more standard to comply to, or is it something that probably you think when you're dealing with a third-party API developer, is it something that helps you in kind of talking the same language or playing by the same rules across the table?
No, I think I totally agree with you saying that just like PCI, there has to be some framework wherein we need to define some set of rules, maybe for third party or vendor, or let's say if we are integrating any API. So apart from API, once that is done, we need to do some AppSec testing and all the vulnerability has to be closed. So there has to be some guidelines or framework separately mentioned for the maybe payment or digital journey. Like let's say digital journey is comprising mainly of cloud, analytics, and mobility. So I would say that these three things could be a key factor to start with the framework. And I think maybe some body like ISO 21000 or something, there has to be some new framework which can be built or maybe suggested by some of the financial authorizers.
Sure, and I think in India, even RBI is working towards in those lines of encouraging some consortium led by the banks, or some consortium which is a non-governmental body which can come up with some kind of standards which probably down the line becomes regulation and can be implemented that manner. Anything from your perspective, that you want to kind of highlight in that area?
I think the regulators done a lot of good job in the area of security for the financial institution, especially for the banks. From the time the Gopalakrishna committee report actually came for the banking industry, that actually touch upon almost all the areas what we discussed here, be it the HR area, vendor area, outsourcing, API, internal ISO 27000 standard following up to the responsibility of the board committees as well. So now that is actually moved only from having a document be there. The RBI is auditing very strictly what is happening. The C-site section of the RBI is actually doing a thorough audit on almost all segments or sections of the IT and information security part of the banks. The thrust on the security being very much increased by actually sending a continuous advisory circulars, mandatory implementation that needs to be done by the banking industry, and online compliance that needs to be submitted by each and every banks. That actually taken a lot of effort actually from the banking side. The regulator side. Same time, the institutions actually they need to actually comply with all these requirements on a timely manner. The same being audited also. So that also all these activities from a framework and regulatory compliance put a lot of importance and controls to the system. Now the last year RBI mandated all the board, 1/3 of the board to be attending the 2-day session, and all the CISOs need to attend 5-day session of the information security courses. And those kind of strict adherence that needs to be done by the management team itself. Those are bringing a lot of culture change within the organization. They understand what is security. The board members earlier maybe they wouldn't have understand what are the cyber security requirements, how that works. Today they are aware of it. At least they may not be aware of the deep level, but they know these are the minimum things that needs to be available, that is to be adhered by any organization. They question. Every board committee they question, do you have this? Do you have this? What is the risk level? How many high, medium, low risks are there? And the knowledge level or the expertise actually going to that level. This made a lot of changes within the organization, the board level and the executive. I think our regulators are doing a good job, a great job in that to bring the culture within the organization, to make all the people aware and to follow this kind of requirements within the institutions to build that very strong and to provide a continuous service to the users.
No, absolutely. I guess one of the key things that we also see in India, I think we all agree to this, that we are heading towards a less cash economy kind of setup, right? So with that perspective, I guess it makes a lot of sense how regulators play a key role in this, and so far they have been doing a good job leaving the technology players alone to innovate and head down that path, while keeping a close watch on what or how things are being evolved, and probably intervene at the right time. Probably that's a good strategy. But Hayk, being your expertise around artificial intelligence and the emerging technology per se, how will standards play a key role in some of these emerging tech? When it comes to say behavioral analytics, etc. What is the role of ethics, or how do you see this kind of changing the game a little bit?
Yeah. Good point. So, like, I was, while some of the co-panelists were responding, I was thinking of, for example, TCP/IP, or everyone knows what's a TCP/IP, right? That's the stack of protocols on which internet is built. So, in technology, the way things work is usually, at least the ones that survive or thrive, there is a standard, then there is a positive reinforcement, then there is what's called indirect suggestion. Standard, positive reinforcement, indirect suggestion. These are the three reasons that if you look at the 2 S's of the 3 S's, speed and seamlessness. Seamlessness counts because there is a standard. A lot of different companies that build based on standards start working with each other seamlessly. Speed counts because, again, interoperability is there, universality is there, so again, because it's built on the same standard. So the very fact that we are actually here with tech is because of standards. I'm generalizing, but I think that's by and large true. Now, to your question about using AI, so with AI, the automation or the technologization, so to speak, process of data and of products, especially in finance, is accelerating, right? So if you pair, and that's what we do, right? If you pair advanced technology or emerging technologies like AI, and you conceptualize everything using behavioral sciences, that's the ideal, that's the non-stoppable combination, because from behavioral science perspective, standards provide defaults or something that you can trust from behavioral or psychological perspective. People, when they see a standard, they automatically think, okay, this is the way I have to develop. And banks and insurance companies know the power of defaults or standards, right? When you're signing or when you're opening a bank account, you don't read the T&Cs, no one does, because people are wired to trust standard or default, right? So from psychological perspective, there's a lot of evidence that we trust the standard. And if you loop into that the AI, so you're using data to analyze as well as build and future-proof whatever the product or business that you are doing, then you are in for a winning formula. That's my 2 cents on that.
Beautiful. I think that sums up the kind of discussion we had here. So as we see, I think we are doing pretty good when it comes to payment industry and the technology that we have adopted, the various options that we have when it comes to payment systems itself, and the challenges, associated challenges that we heard from the panel today. So I would probably use the last 5-10 minutes that we have, open up for any questions that audience might have to the panel members here.
Very fine discussion. Now see, we are slowly, steadily moving to digital. I think we should thank our Prime Minister Narendra Modi for this and all your panels sitting here. But my questions and worry is that online transactions, there are online fraud are very common nowadays. So as a cyber security, what protection you are making to prevent that online fraud, so that we can use more and more technology digitalized? That's.
Anybody, Vinod, want to take up?
So I'll just, so there are a lot of things that companies are doing and techies are doing that's getting displayed outside. But sir, time and again, the one thing, the cyber fraud which is happening, it's not happening because of the technological flaws. It's happening because of the behavioral flaws. In India, during Diwali, if you get a message, book my show, do pay do ticket free, right? You end up clicking on that link. And you end up going to a phishing page, you end up putting your credit card details over there, you get 2 tickets bought from your card, but he gets the money. And that's how the fraud happens. So there's nothing to do with the technology. It's more or less to do with awareness in our country, because we were completely not aware how to use this technology. The phones have become smart, but have we? This is the question. And most of the frauds leverage the gap between the technology and the understanding we have, unfortunately.
We need to ensure that apart from technology, we need to be safe from the attackers.
I think it's a very valid summation of what we were talking about as well, Avez, So it's not just about the business, the technology working on securing the systems, etc. It's all about the consumers as well as the users who actually need to understand how this technology works, and kind of segregating between even for example, if somebody comes to your house to deliver a courier, and nowadays they thankfully don't ask for your Aadhaar card or a ID card per se, but how many of us simply hand over all these information to some courier fellow to actually take down the number, and we don't know what do they do about it. If you look at the dark web, hordes and hordes of information is available even without our knowledge about our credit card, about our personal information. It's being sold like kanda batata. So these are things that we have to be aware of while we tread the digital journey. Digital is a kind of how the way we look at it is, it's a completely separate fabric to the physical life that we have. So the persona that we create in the digital era, how they interact and how they kind of operate with each other. If we start understanding that, I guess it's a journey for us as well. How do we transform from a physical world to a digital world, correct? So augmented reality, there's n number of things that will come our way. And these aspects will actually help us in slowly going towards that digital era. Thanks for the question.
Can I add one sentence? I won't do much justice. Ave's already said everything, and you added the 2 cents. But technology basically can be used for good or bad intentions. Like Ave said, it's a tool. So the real question is whether I can use this technology for a good reason or bad. A lot of technology you can use for either reasons, right? So it really comes back to my motivation, my incentives, why I'm doing what I'm doing. And for me, the question is, okay, can I use this technology to do something bad? whether that's fraud or cheating, or can I use that? At the end of the day, it's really that the question. So that's why technologically you can patch here and there and have some sort of a tool, but the real question you have to address is nothing to do with technology. You have to think, what's the motivation, what's the norm, why are these people doing what they are doing? That, if you address that, then everything else will fall into place.
Any last questions? Do we have the time?
We're racing against time, sir. So.
Okay. All right. So thanks so much for listening to us, and thanks to the panel audience, panel members here for so many valuable insights that they provided when it comes to payment system itself, as well as the underlying business and technology problems. Hope it was insightful for you all, and thank you very much for listening to us for the last 1 year. Thank you.